Yo, what's up? Hardleg Joe here. No idea why I'm singing my intros now, but I think it's got a nice ring to it. Comment in the comments what you think. I think I'm going to try that out for a little bit. But anyway, 2018 is over and done with. 2019 is just beginning. So it's time once again for the What a Deck retrospective. If you're somehow unfamiliar with my channel, What a Deck is a series where I play Yu-Gi-Oh! Used to be weekly, now it's bi-weekly. And in every episode I play a new deck and test it out in 10 random duels against opponents on YGOPro to see how it holds up in the current game. Now my aim with the show is mostly just to have fun, try new things, but I also go out of my way to try and make decks that can stand the test of time. At least in Yu-Gi-Oh! Terms. I aim for my builds to be playable for at least a year after I make them, so I stay away from competitive decks and any cards that I feel are broken, since those are most likely to be hit on the ban list. This video is where I go back over those decks and see how well I succeeded in that goal. Today I'll be looking at Year 3 of What a Deck, which spans episodes 105 to 156. I'll be looking at each deck briefly, seeing what cards have been banned or limited, talking about what changes I would make if I played it today, and judging its viability on a 4-tiered scale. Which should be on the screen, Joe. Please put the thing up on the screen. Okay, good. That's not, now you know everything. Okay. Without further ado, let's jump right into it. So kicking it off, we have episode 105, Lehrer Troll Turbo. And unfortunately, Dark Hole was played at 2, and that is now at 1. That's going to be a recurring theme. You're probably going to hear that a lot. It's really kind of weird. Once Dark Hole came off the ban list to 2, I didn't really expect it to go back to 1. I think most people thought that, like, once they relaxed on that, they would keep it relaxed. But no. So there's a whole bunch of stuff where I played what I called the Triumvirate of Destruction, 1 Raigeki, 2 Dark Holes. And that's pretty much the biggest recurring thing you're going to be seeing on this list is 1 too many Dark Holes. But fortunately, that's really easy to replace. I don't think any of my decks, needed that extra Dark Hole. But I digress. Lehrer Troll, is it still viable? Yes. It's a Troll deck and an OTK deck, which are pretty much like the 2 longest lifespan types of decks you can build, and it focuses just on making 1 extra deck monster. So even though this was made before Master Rule 4, the changes don't really hurt it. It can work just as well as Lynx as it did before. If I was going to make this thing today, I would remove the Quaking Mirror Forces, since they don't work on Lynx. Probably just replace it with Storming Mirror Force instead. Other than that, it's pretty good as is. I mean, if you don't want to OTK, you could take out the Stoic Challenge, but then it's not really much of a troll deck then, is it? Moving on to episode 106, Pendulum Magician Dimension Dragon Toolbox. This has a bunch of banned cards. Double Irish Magician was played at 2, now it's forbidden, and Astrograph Sorcerer was played at 3 and is also forbidden. And is this thing still viable without those? Kind of. I'm breaking my own scale already. Pendulum Magicians as an archetype are a super strong deck, still a viable rogue option, but this is nowhere near that build of it. This was made as a Patreon request, and they just wanted me to make a deck that could make all 4 of the Dimension Dragons. And if you want to do that, this deck can do this, just put in some other pendulums. But it doesn't work very well. Even then, it didn't work as well as it could have been. So, if you want to play this, just play a different version. Episode 107, Pure Zephyrus Stun, played Denlong at 1, who is now banned. But fortunately, he didn't really play that big of a role in the deck, so I don't think that really hurts it all that much. Is this still viable? Somewhat. Master Rule 4 changed a lot for pendulums, and its playstyle was pretty much to have a single counter trap and maybe some disruption, which isn't nearly as strong as it used to be, but there are still some decks that can be really fucked up by a single good counter trap, especially if you can recur another counter trap every turn. So I think it still does decently, just not nearly as well as it did. If I was going to build this today, definitely remove Echo Oscillation, replace that with Terraforming, gotta make this thing faster, gotta have more consistency. Maybe add in some hand traps as well. I don't know, I'd have to see what I could take out of it. And definitely put Electromite into the extra deck, as well as a couple other links. Maybe take out some of those Synchros, or one of the rank 5 Ixies, since I don't see how I made those all that much. Next up, episode 108, rank up Phantom Knights. No banned cards, huzzah! Is it still viable? Somewhat. It could be much, much better now that the Phantom Knights have a link, and I think they have a new trap. I don't remember if that came out after this or before this, but Phantom Knights are definitely better now. I actually made a Phantom Knight deck this year. I called it Phantom Knights and Friends, which has kind of a similar win condition. It still does the rank up, it just doesn't focus as much on that. If you're going to build Phantom Knights, I would look at that deck profile and not this one. After that, we have episode 109, Junk Doppel Toolbox. And once again, we have Dark Hole played at 2, now at 1, but it doesn't really affect anything. Especially not with this deck. This deck is probably not viable anymore. Honestly, wasn't all that great at the time, and Master Rule 4 hurts it a lot, pretty much making it impossible to summon Blazar without adding a bunch of extra steps in, because you've got to make links first. You could still do the Junk OTK part of this deck, but that was kind of like the weaker part of this. You can't really do all the Synchro Toolbox shenanigans that you used to do. And honestly, with how Synchros work, if I was going to build this today, I would just build it from scratch, just start over with links in mind. In stark contrast is episode 110, Phantom Spiral Dragon Stun. This played Terraforming at 3, which is now at 2, which is probably going to be another common theme now that I think of it. Although I can't really blame myself, everyone kind of knew Terraforming would get hit eventually. It searches every field spell. It's too generic not to be hit. We were lucky we had it at 3 for so long. But anyway, is this still viable? I'm gonna say very yes. Yes plus. This deck wrecks me pretty much every time I face it, no matter what kind of deck I build against. I'm honestly kind of surprised this doesn't see more play as like a rogue contender. It's really effective, it can run skill drain, it can run all sorts of things. And especially with C Stealth Attack coming out that lets you protect the field spell, you just tribute off your tokens, you keep getting new tokens, and everything they battle is just destroyed at the start of damage calculation. Like, if you don't start with a whole bunch of Twin Twisters, this deck will just ruin your shit right off the bat. If I had to build it today, I would add in C Stealth Attack, but other than that, it's pretty solid. The deck doesn't need a whole lot to do a whole lot. Episode 111, Superheavy Samurai Synchro, that played Max C at 1, who is now banned. But again, it's just a one of, it doesn't really affect things that much. Is the deck viable? Somewhat. It's less effective, but it can still OTK with the right hand. I actually did try to build a 2018 version of Superheavy Samurais, and it was a little too linear for my taste, but it still works. It's just kind of boring now. They did just have a new link that was added. You could maybe put some hand traps in here. Again, if I was going to make this, I would probably just start over from scratch, remake it with Master Rule 4 and links in mind. Next up, another machine deck, Cyber Dragon OTK. Once more, we have our old friend Dark Hole. Was at 2, now at 1. Is this deck viable? Somewhat. I mean, yeah, again, it's another OTK deck, so it can still OTK, but it could be much, much better. We've since gotten a whole lot of Cyber Dragon support. They've got a bunch of new cards that make them much more effective, not just at OTKing, but also stunning. So I think if you were going to build this again, once more, start from scratch, just remake it entirely with the new support in mind, because you might have an entirely different win condition trying to make stun Cyber Dragons instead of OTK. After that, episode 113, a personal favorite, AAA, which is just all artifacts, the 2017 edition of pure artifacts. No banned cards in this one, though sadly it's probably not really viable. It barely worked at the time, and even though we've got Moraltak back at 3, the deck is just too slow. This is another deck like Superheavy Samurais that I fully intended to make in 2018, made a whole build, tested it out, and it just wasn't working. The deck is just too slow. You need to like set everything and then destroy it on your opponent's turn and try to disrupt them. But it just can't disrupt fast enough unless you just get the perfect hand. And then it can't follow it up with enough damage to really make up for that stun. It does still work. It's probably good at like a casual setting, like a locals. And it is really fun to play. It's just nowhere near as powerful as it used to be. And it used to be mediocre at best, so, In sharp contrast to that, we have Ultimate Conductor Tyranno Beatdown, episode 114. Once again, Dark Hole played at 2, now at 1. But this also had Miscellaneousaurus, which was played at 3, who is also now at 1, and Terraforming, that was played at 3, which is now at 2. Despite all these things being banned, though, the deck is still very viable. This build is a little outdated. It could be much better because there's new dinosaur support, Ultimate Evolution Pill or whatever it's called, and Coatless, the other dinosaur that lets you negate stuff. There's more cool dinosaur stuff that's not in here. But if you add it in, this thing could definitely be very powerful. I'd remove the Quaking Mirror Force and the Floodgate Trap Hole for sure, as well as the Jirax and probably the level 1 tuner, and just replace it with all the new dinosaur support. Episode 115, Pure Digital Bugs, another deck that played Dark Hole at 2. And is it still viable? No. No, not at all, sadly. This is one of the more fun episodes. I distinctly remember thinking that this deck was, like, not very good, and then having it go, I think, 9-1. Like, it did surprisingly well in the episode. Digital Bugs have a lot of surprising plays. Unfortunately, it's killed by links. Not necessarily Master Rule 4, but links themselves, because they can't go into defense mode. And if you're unfamiliar with Digital Bugs, they're all about shifting your opponent's monsters into defense mode, and then doing things to those defense mode monsters. And without the ability to do that, with so many people able to make these link monsters, Digital Bugs just don't stand a chance anymore. After that, we have Silent Spellbooks, episode 116, which has no banned cards. Hurrah! Is it still viable? Probably not. Might be something you can do to make it work, but I'm not exactly sure. Pretty much the whole deck was just turboing out Silent Magician and Spellbook of Fate, which is still decent. Like, if you have a spell negate and a monster banish, like, you can do some stuff. But I don't feel like that's a really good opening in today's day and age. Especially when you have a lot of decks today, like Dark Warrior and Danger, that are playing, like, pretty much no spells that are just all monster effects. Silent Magician just doesn't really do as much as she used to. Next on the list, we have 117, Skull Servant Beatdown, 2017 edition. Banned cards, Dark Hole, played at 2, now at 1. Pretty much every Beatdown deck or every OTK deck I had just played Dark Hole. If you could destroy your opponent's field, you could attack for 8,000. But I digress. Is this deck still viable? Somewhat. I mean, you could still attack for like 10,000. It takes like a turn or two to get set up, but if you can get set up, then you're good. Not really any changes I would make to this deck. Nothing I would do differently if I played it today. Maybe get rid of Forbidden Chalice. You could probably find a better generic support card. Definitely put in some links. Link Karibo in particular, really good in this deck. Otherwise, it's set. Which is honestly the only reason I didn't replay this in 2018. Because there's no real big changes I could make. The deck would be pretty much exactly what it was in 2017, and I never wanted to remake the exact same deck twice in a row. Moving on to episode 118, we have UA Toolbox 2017 edition. This is another deck that foolishly played Terraforming at 3, and is now at 2. Is it still viable? Sadly, probably not. It relies heavily on its normal summon. It relies heavily on a search. It relies heavily on going second and being able to attack into things. And not getting a brick hand. And if any of those 4 things get disrupted, you're gonna have a bad time. And getting disrupted is a lot easier in this day and age. It still can OTK, but it's just so fragile, I'm not sure if it's worth it. If I did make it again today, probably remove Tragodia, probably remove Forbidden Chalice. Not sure what to replace them with, though. Pot of Desires, maybe. Called by the Grave, maybe. Just something to give it more consistency and more survivability so that you can just go for that OTK and try to hit it as often as possible. Up next, we have Preta Lords, which is Preta Plants with Dark Lords. Episode 119, No Banned Cards, yay. Is it still viable? No, not at all. This deck was essentially Greedy Venom Fusion Dragon Turbo, and while that's a good card, and you can kind of like kaiju your opponent with the evil corn, that's not really good enough in this day and age, because you can't OTK with it, and it doesn't really have any defense or anything to like stun your opponent during their turn. So most likely what's going to happen is you're going to hit them for a lot, and then they're going to completely wreck you the next turn. So I really don't think it would work that well. You'd probably be better off playing just pure Dark Lords at this point, especially since they've gotten some new support. As for Preta Plants, I don't know, I really don't see them doing all that much. Maybe someone in the comments can tell me otherwise, but probably not going to be trying them anytime soon. After that, we have episode 120, Totally Ice Barriers. And wouldn't you know, there's no banned cards in this. Is it still viable, though? I mean, it wasn't really all that viable to begin with, so probably not. I mean, at the same time, it's probably not any worse than it was. I think its win condition is about as powerful as it was last year, so if you want something super trolly, this is still super trolly. I'd definitely, again, remove the Quaking Mirror Forces, put it out for another Mirror Force, maybe Storming, maybe just the classic Mirror Force. Quaking just doesn't do anything now that we have Lynx. Up next we have 121, Deep Eyes Troll. Another troll deck. I didn't realize I did so many of these in a row. 0 banned cards, and I would say it is somewhat viable. With the new Blue Eyes support, you might be able to make it a little more consistent, maybe get it down to less than 50 cards, but I'm not exactly sure. Either way, Blue Eyes still is a pretty big powerhouse. Deep Eyes is still a pretty good burn that you can surprise your opponent with, just hit them with a 3,000 after you've already attacked them, and just finish off the game. The only thing I'd worry about is, like, you want to put Bingo Machine Go in there, because that'll search everything. But if you search Deep Eyes, it's completely going to ruin the surprise. Can you even search Deep Eyes? I should have checked this before I record. Either way, it's a Blue Eyes deck. It's a trolley variant of it. It like all Blue Eyes decks, it's suffered over the years, but it can still do some things. Up next, we have episode 122, Cubic Burn, the 2017 edition. And I should note here that this is when Link format started, at least for me. This is when I started playing in Master Rule 4 with Links. Of course, early on, most of these decks didn't really have a robust set of Links. Pretty much just Decode Talker and Mrs. Radiant, and oftentimes Firewall Dragon, which I guess I should mention here. Firewall Dragon, obviously banned now. I put it in a whole bunch of decks, but I'm not really going to mention it as one of the banned cards. I'm not really going to count it, because it was never really important or essential to any of those decks. It was mostly just filler. It can be replaced with Boral Sword Dragon, or Topological Bomber Dragon, or really any generic Link, and it would still function exactly the same, so that don't count. But anyway, Cubic Burn, no banned cards, and still somewhat viable. Don't think it needs any changes. Maybe add Pot of Desires for more speed. Seems like it could still be a decent OTK, but it's hard to know without trying to play it again. Cubics are one of those decks, they're kind of neat, it's fun to hit with big numbers and big burn, but kind of linear for my tastes. Although if I recall, you can do some neat Link shenanigans using their trap. I don't know. Comment in the comments if you want to see more Cubics in 2019. Up next, we have episode 123, which should have been ABC's. I missed that opportunity. But no, it's Subterror Stun, which played Terraforming at 3, and now it's at 2. Is it still viable? I'm gonna say yes, but just barely yes. I still think it's quite effective, but I'm not super confident without having played it again. If we get Subterror Guru, or if you just want to play with OCG cards and use Subterror Guru, I think this could be a full-on great deck. I think it definitely has a lot of potential, and I'd like to play it again if we get that. But until we get that, I think this deck is just slightly above average. The Prediction Princess stuff in here, I'm not really sure about, especially again if you get Guru. I'm not sure if she just gets in the way then, or if she adds to the effectiveness. It's hard to say without testing. Again, maybe someone in the comments can let me know. Up next, episode 124, Goki Beatdown, which played Dark Hole at 2, which is of course now at 1. Is this still viable? Kind of. Gokis in general work really great as link spam still. I believe they're still meta. I'm not exactly sure, but I know they could shit out an extra link board. They can make topological Gumblar Dragon. And even if you didn't want to play that, even if you just want to beat down with them, I'm pretty sure with all their new support is good. This build is not good though. I think you'd want to this is another instance where like the archetype in general is good, but you'd want to rebuild this deck entirely from scratch. Remove Chalice, remove Lance, remove the traps in it. Just start with the ground up, use the new support, and try to go for whatever win condition you want. Episode 125 is Hand Trap Tricks, which played Maxi at 1, which is now banned. And it's somewhat viable. It can be improved a lot. You definitely want to remove Engraver of the Mark. I think I mostly just played that because it's one of my favorite cards. But not really all that good. You can play Bottomless at 3 now. There's also the card Trap Trick, which I assume works really good in this, as well as the newly announced Link, which I'm not sure when that's coming out in America, but definitely gonna make these more powerful. As long as hand traps are good and trap holes are good, I think Hand Trap Tricks is gonna be a pretty solid deck. Moving on to 126, we have a Mage Advantage, which played Terraforming at 3, which is now at 2. This deck probably not viable. Maybe with the Link, but who knows when we're going to get that. And without it, I think this is probably too slow, too trap reliant, too much reliance on gaining life points. Definitely remove Broken Line if I made this in favor of Refuge and Audacity. That almost feels like it was a Mage support in everything but name. Also want to add more links. Get some links in here, maybe some more synchros, but I'm not sure if any of that can salvage just the Mage engine in general. Episode 127, Pure Cyberdarks. No banned cards here, and this deck is not viable in the slightest. It was barely viable when I played it. I believe this was another Patreon request that I just sort of did because I got paid to do it, and it worked alright, but there's just not much to it. It's a pretty simple deck. And there's not much you could do to make it better. I think this build is about as good as it gets. Maybe add in some better traps, like evenly matched, to make up for the fact that you're playing Cyberdarks. But other than that, you're pretty much set. Episode 128 is Crawler Grind, which again has no banned cards. This still viable, I believe. I think Crawler's kind of underrated, although you can definitely add some more stuff in to make it better. Replace the Metaverse with Terraforming, maybe? I don't know, I remember you could use Metaverse to, like, trick people into attacking your stuff and then put up the field spell so they're bounced. But I think in this day and age, you probably just want to turbo out as many monsters onto the field as possible. You also want to add in World Legacy Survivor, which is a great search card for the deck, and World Legacy Mind Meld, which is a great stun card that lets you do all sorts of nutty things. There's also Deus Ex Crawler, which was just announced, the big level 9 crawler that you can, I believe, search from the deck with something. I've seen people play it. It's a pretty big behemoth. It's like a skill drain on legs. Crawlers, most of them, I guess some of them have legs. They're weird. Crawlers are weird, but they're still pretty good. They can grind out until the cows come home. Whatever that means. Episode 129, Ghost Trick Beatdown, another terraforming deck. You played it too now. Somewhat still viable. It's Ghost Tricks. They always kind of work. No matter how fast the game gets, they seem to be able to slow it down to their level, assuming they can get that foothold to begin with. If you want to know what I would play if I made Ghost Tricks this year, look at my 2018 version. That's the changes I would make. I played the mill variant there, but the beatdown variant is almost the same. Just replace the skeletons with, steins and ghouls. Episode 130 is Link-centric ABC, which played set rotation at 3, which is now at 1. Is this still viable? Yes. But why would you want to? This was made sort of as an experiment, a way to work links into an ABC deck when links were still new, and people really didn't know exactly how they worked. And this version still works. It can still get, like, Decode Talker with ABC, and then Cyber Infinity Dragon underneath it. But people have since found much, much better ways to do this. There are much more viable ABC link decks that pretty much make my version obsolete. So if I was going to build this today, pretty much start from scratch. The only mildly useful tech I had in here was Galaxy Soldier. I don't know if most ABC players use that, but I think it's a really good card. Lets you dump stuff in the graveyard and make your Cyber Infinity Dragon. Other than keeping that, though, and just the ABC engine in general, I'd probably just start from scratch and rebuild it entirely new. Episode 131 is Amazoness Beatdown, which has no banned cards, and is probably not viable. Yeah, I mean, it still works. It's a really fun deck. I remember having a lot of fun playing Amazoness, but it's a bit slow for standard Yu-Gi-Oh! I can see why it was more of a Duel Links thing. Doesn't really need any changes, as far as I could tell. If I played it again today, probably do the same build, or something very, very similar. Next up, 132, Venn Dreadmill. Again, no banned cards, and again, probably not really viable. Looking over at this thing again, it's kind of a mess. It was made before Vendreads had most of their support. I was basically just throwing in a bunch of Shiranui stuff and random zombie stuff. Just combine it as best as I can. This is another example where you probably just want to start over from scratch, look at all the new Vendread support, and see what you can do with that. Up next is Weather Painter Control. Again, no banned cards. It must have been somewhere around here that Dark Hole got put back to 1, because I don't think there's any more Dark Hole at 2 in the rest of this list. Hopefully. I'll be embarrassed if I find more. But regardless, is this deck viable? Somewhat. I can't imagine it's any worse than it used to be, but it was never all that great to begin with. It's a slow, grindy deck with kind of a weak win condition. It can definitely wear your opponent down, but if they can get the advantage, if they can get through all your shit, then you're pretty much done for. If I was going to change this, definitely remove Herald of Greenlight, change it for Desires, or more traps, maybe a Drowning Mirror Force. Definitely add Rainbowy Canvas when it comes out, the new trap that lets you summon stuff from the deck. That seems like it's really good. Not sure if I'd go with the Degenerate Circuit. That was really fun, but I'm not sure if banishing stuff is as good as it used to be. Up next, we have 134, Bishbalkan Troll TK. Banned cards are Grinder Golem, which I played at 3, and is now at 1. And this thing is not viable. It was a really weird troll deck that barely worked at the time, and made use of cards that I knew were broken and that I knew were gonna get banned. And now that Grinder Golem is banned and the game has sped up, I can't imagine it doing much of anything. So if I was going to build this today, I wouldn't bother. After that, we have Crystal Abundance Turbo, good old Crystal Beast, coming in at 135. Another deck that played Terraforming at 3, now at 2, and it's probably not viable. There's another kind of trolley deck, wasn't really meant to be competitive. Still works, certainly, but good luck surviving long enough to pull off the win condition. As for changes, just replace the terraforming with something. Another Crystal Beacon? Raigeki, maybe? I don't know. After that, 136, Forbidden Prediction Time. No banned cards, and still somewhat viable. Hard to say exactly. I'm actually really eager to try Time Lords again, see how they do in the modern game. I'm not sure if they will troll Supreme, or just get removed with targeted removal. We'll have to see. As for changes, Solemn Scolding seems like a pretty steep cost to pay. Maybe replace it with just Solemn Strike, or something that saves you a turn even, like Battle Fader or Waboku. Just something that lets you stall until you can get another Time Lord on the field. Episode 137, Christmas Gift, the 2017 edition, has no banned cards, of course, and implying that it was ever viable in the first place is kind of a joke. If you want to see how I would play this in 2018, look at the 2018 version. Moving on to 138, the Ritual Beast Toolbox, 0 banned cards, and, probably not viable? To be honest, I can barely remember this deck. In my mind, I always think of Ritual Beast as being this really slow, borderline terrible deck, but I remember thinking they would suck at the time, and then I ended up doing surprisingly well, so it's really hard to say, but I can't imagine them being all that viable in 2019. Moving on to 139, we have Zodiac Borbro Beatdown. Another deck that played Terraforming at 3, and another deck that is probably not viable. I mean, it could still OTK, it's still a fun rogue deck, but good luck getting off your combos with all the hand traps around. Really doesn't need any changes, though. Not much you could change about it to make it any more viable. Maybe add in some links instead of the rank 4 toolbox. Maybe add in Called by the Grave to try to stop the hand traps, but I think this deck just searches too much and summons too much from the deck for it to really be worth it. Episode 140, Metaphys Lucksack. Banned cards, none. Still viable? Yes. I think Metaphys are an underrated rogue option. Any deck that can banish your opponent's entire field with one monster effect, pretty good, and they've only gotten better with new support. Now you don't have to play the normal monster. If I were to do this, I would get rid of the normal monster, and probably Left Arm Offering as well, and replace them with the new monster. I believe it's Decoy Dragon, Metaphys Decoy Dragon, and the new Trap, which is also pretty good. Moving on to episode 141, we have Abyss Actor Advantage, which played Electromite at 2, and it's now at 1, which doesn't really make a big difference. The second one was essentially just a backup anyway, so the deck still works as well as it did. Although this is another example of a deck that's kind of viable, in that I think Abyss Actors as an archetype are viable, but their new support makes them play entirely differently. So if I was going to make this, I would rebuild the entire deck from scratch with the new support in mind. Which I might do pretty soon. I'll have to look. Do we have the new support yet? Joe in the future, look that up. Episode 142, 50-card Mythical Beasts. This played Astrograph Sorcerer at 3, who is now banned, and Terraforming at 3, which is of course now at 2. Is this still viable? Probably not. In fact, I'm just going to make this a no. This was a weird build that I basically had to push out the door because of my weekly schedule. I didn't have enough time to build something better or build something new. I'm not sure if it works without Astrograph, and even then, there are probably better ways to build Mythical Beasts. If I was going to build this again, just start from scratch, completely disregard this mess, and try to do it differently. Episode 143, the Gladiator Beast Toolbox has no banned cards, and is still somewhat viable. It's playable now that we have the link. It's another fun rogue deck that does really well when it works, but can be disrupted kind of easily. Changes I'd make are, take out the Book of Eclipse, since I don't think it stuns as well as it used to. Maybe replace it with more counter traps for protection, or even Moon Mirror Shield to assume that first attack goes off without a hitch. 144, Link Thief Cyber Angels, or LT Cyber Angels. Another deck that played Terraforming at 3, now at 2. And another deck that I think is actually underrated, a very viable deck, especially now that Boral Sword is a thing, we have that new trap that could steal monsters, and there's new Cyber Angel support. And incantations too. There's a lot of stuff. I should really revisit this deck, because I think you could do a lot of things with it that you couldn't do last year. As for the exact changes I make, though, not sure, just because there's so many options. I'd really have to look at them all in depth and do a lot of testing before I could say for sure. Probably one of those 4 things. Definitely adding in Boral Sword Dragon. Nothing better than stealing your opponent's monster and then using it to make a giant OTK machine. Episode 145, Going Second Inspector Border, no banned cards, and still somewhat viable. I mean, Inspector Border is always going to be a strong lockdown, and lockdown decks are always going to be somewhat fragile and luck dependent, so it works it just doesn't work great. Not sure, again, what changes I would make on this one, because it's such a weird build. Maybe look at the new Cyber Dragon support for help? I don't know. Episode 146, Millennium Eyes Kaiju, another terraforming deck, which is probably not viable. Most people know how to play around Millennium Eyes by now, so its lockdown isn't nearly as strong as it used to be. And there's so much swarming in the game anyway, especially right now, that even kaijus aren't really what they used to be. If I was going to try this anyway, though, I'd definitely remove the kaiju files, replace it with more generic spell trap support, maybe Eater of Millions, since the extra deck is barely used. Moving on to 147, we have Ancient Gear OTK, which has no banned cards. Once again, it's an OTK deck, which means it's always going to be somewhat viable. Unless Konami raises the life point values, dealing 10,000 is still dealing 10,000. If your opponent has no response, you win. As for changes, nothing that I can think of. Looks solid enough as is. In sharp contrast, we have 148 Ignite Sorcerer, which played Astrograph Sorcerer at 3 and is now banned, and is probably not viable as a result. If the name didn't tip you off, Astrograph Sorcerer is really what made this deck, and without it, I'm not sure how well it can do. Maybe add in Desires to try to OTK, since all the Ignites are interchangeable, doesn't really matter what you banish. Might work, but really hard to say. After that, we have episode 149, Tricks Artifacts. Also played Terraforming at 3. And, yeah, it's probably still viable. I mean, Trick Stars are good, right? And this is just bad Trick Stars, which means it's still probably decent. Could surprise people. I don't know. If I was going to build it again, which hopefully I won't have to, because I didn't want to build this deck to begin with, new Trick Stars support? Question mark? I haven't looked into it, but it exists. As for episode 150, Mind Games 2, I had a second copy of Exodia, you should be good. Episode 151, Pure DDD Toolbox, has no banned cards, and is still very viable. This deck is super underrated in my opinion, and I love it. Its biggest weakness is the fact that it didn't have a good Link 2 to go into. It was kind of reliant on making Skull Dread. But now a new Link 2 DD has been announced, and I look forward to trying them out again this year. As for changes I would make to it, really depends. If I was making it right now with TCG legal cards, I would just keep it the same. It doesn't really need any changes. If I was going to make it with the Link, you could probably just add it in, but I think I'd want to do more with that. If you're unfamiliar with it, the Link has an effect that lets you complete your pendulum scales from the deck, which means a lot of previously situational cards are now viable. You could play one-ofs and just add them to your pendulum scales from the deck. So I might rebuild this from scratch with that in mind, make it a more pendulum-based build. But I don't know. I'd have to test it out and see. We'll see later again in 2019, I'm sure. Unless, Konami decides that DDDs don't need to get imports. That could always happen. Moving on to episode 152, we have 60 card Ojamas, another Terraforming at 3 deck. Take your hat off. A moment of silence for Ojamas. As for its viability, somewhat. I mean, it's Ojamas. They're never great, but they can still do all the things they did last year, namely, hit your opponent with Ojama Delta Hurricane and then Link Climb like crazy. The fact that we have Boral Sword now makes it slightly better, maybe? But you still have to get to that point, which is the real difficulty. We also have the Link, but I'm not sure that does anything for this build of the deck. Couldn't hurt to put it in, though. If I was building this thing today, I'd definitely include the Link. But other than that, it's perfect. It's a magnificent work of art as is. I'm sure Ojama Line would approve.
I approve.
Moving on to episode 153, we have Raid Raptor Dynamite, which has 0 banned cards. And this deck is not viable. This was built with the old Raid Raptor mentality in mind of turboing out Ultimate Falcon, which really doesn't work in a post-kaiju, post-Utopia the Lightning age. That being said, there is a much better version of this deck that makes use of all the other Ixies and the rank-up magics and their links. Just a way better deck entirely. So, Raid Raptors in general are not dead, but this version is dead. You'd want to rebuild it from scratch entirely with the other Ixies and the rank-up magics in mind. Episode 154 is Metaltron the 13th Turbo, which, once more, played Terraforming at 3. But, unlike Raid Raptors, this is very viable. True Draco is actually borderline meta contender, kind of a rogue deck, but still shows up from time to time, even without Masterpiece. And they've only gotten stronger with the unbanning of Dynamite Knight. Definitely add that in if you were making this today, as well as a second copy of the Fire Guy. What's his name? Dynister? Something? I forget. You know what I'm talking about. If you wanted to make this thing more competitive, probably take out the Drylith III, put in Pot of Desires, Pot of Indulgence even, since this deck doesn't really use the extra deck, aside from just Metaltron shenanigans. Overall, just a really great thing. Not sure if I'll revisit it, but a fun deck nonetheless. Moving on to 155, we have Pure Dark Worlds, which has no banned cards, and is not viable in the slightest. This version of Dark Worlds was pretty much made useless as soon as Dangers came out. If you want to play Dark Worlds, that's the way to do it. This is just horribly outdated. Scrap the deck, start over entirely, use the Dangers. And that just brings us to episode 156, AntiMeta Spirits 2018, which has no banned cards, and is still a very viable choice. Shino Birds are really powerful, non-targeting, clearing the field, very effective, and anything that can main deck a mono Iwano gonna be pretty strong. It's not meta by any means, but still a solid rogue choice, especially if you're looking for something cheap. Might be better with some incantations. I'll have to look into experimenting with those this year. If I make Spirits, I don't know, Spirits are my favorite deck from way back when I first started playing Yu-Gi-Oh! I've played them every year, but now I feel like the Shino Birds are actually so powerful that there's just not much you can really do with Spirits. You just make the same Shino Bird deck that everyone else came up with. We'll see, though. I'll definitely test it out, definitely see. Maybe I can make a more trolly version or something. I'll figure it out sometime around May when we get to the, what would that be, the 4th or 5th? That'd be the 4th anniversary of What a Deck. It's weird looking back that I've been doing this so long. But hopefully you guys have enjoyed. Well, I mean, I know you guys have enjoyed it. It's my most popular series. It gets so many views. I still get a lot of comments from people who are just discovering the series, going back through everything. So it's nice to look back and be reminded of the things I've made, and hopefully look forward a little bit to the stuff I could do in the future. I'm going to try to put out a poll here in the next couple days, asking what kind of decks you'd like to see me revisit. Some of these ones that I'm thinking about doing again. Look in the community tab if you haven't checked that. It might be there. Either way, I hope you enjoyed this video. Thanks for watching, and until next time, good luck, and have fun.